Ladies and gentlemen, a very warm welcome to the public symposium on the future of maritime security in East Asia in the aftermath of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. It's my pleasure to welcome you here to the Academy of the Konrad Adenauer Foundation in Berlin. It's a long and complex title, but I think it's very appropriate to the task we will face this afternoon. Actually, what we are going to discuss has been a long time challenge for the countries in East Asia. And for a certain period, the challenges, if not to say the threats for maritime security in the region came from Europe and from the United States. But today the challenges are being rooted in China and in Russia, whereas the United States have been heavily engaged in the region since the 1940s and are seen as a guarantor for the rules-based international order, which is being defied by the former countries. More than that, the United States declared already in 2012, 12 years ago, under President Obama, the American pivot to Asia. And with all the differences existing in American politics, there we have to recognize a strong consensus among policymakers in Washington that the focus of interest for them lies in Asia and especially in East Asia. Europe, understood as the European Union and the United Kingdom, has been showing different approaches and different degrees of interest. In the last decade, there has been a decade of growing awareness that maritime security, with its potential impacts on the freedom of navigation, is a key interest for Europe, not only with regard to a generally peaceful world, what we all wish for, but especially for our economic interest as a global economic player, what the European Union is and what is particularly important for Germany. This process of getting more and more aware about the relevance and importance of maritime security in East Asia got a strong push with the Russian invasion of Ukraine almost exactly 2 years ago. This is valid for East Asian countries, but also for us in Europe. Many people, many economic and many political actors eventually realized that the undesired can become true against all odds. Last year, I had personally the opportunity to visit first Taiwan and then Japan, and to see how important the Russian invasion of Ukraine there has been taken as a proof for what can happen when you do not prepare yourself against potential aggression from authoritarian countries. For us at Konrad Adenauer Foundation, that event of unjustifiable aggression in Eastern Europe has become a central matter of our activities in Germany, in Europe, and around the world. I just arrived from our biggest event in 2024 this year, called Café Kiev, in a big conference center here in Berlin, with more than 3,000 participants from Ukraine, from Germany, and from whole Europe, discussing and working in more than 50 workshops, panels, and conferences, and other kind of events. This afternoon, right before I left, the President of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, came and gave an inspiring and motivating speech. When it now comes to the future of maritime security in East Asia, I think we should start with analyzing the current reality and discussing options for common activities in order to obtain the highest possible degree of maritime security in East Asia, in the interest of all of us, East Asian countries and European countries. That is why I'm very grateful that we have today the opportunity with this international high-level panel to discuss all that, which has been organized by the Konrad Adenauer Foundation together with its partner, the Research Institute for Peace and Security in Tokyo. And here I want to stress the leading role in that effort of Professor Hideshi Tokoshi, the president of the institute. He will also moderate the following panel. I want to thank him personally and his institution on behalf of Konrad Adenauer Foundation. And I want to thank also the panelists, our Member of Parliament, Alexander Radwan, and Dr. Alexandra Sakaki from Germany, Professor James Kraska from the United States, Mrs. Sumathi Permal from Malaysia, and Admiral Tomohisa Takei from Japan. All of them will probably be introduced by Professor Tokushi. For Konrad Adenauer Foundation, the issue of maritime security in general, and with focus on East Asia, has been important in our broad work internationally because of all the reasons just mentioned. And we want to continue to work on raising the awareness to the issue, to the challenges, and providing analysis, facts and concepts here in Berlin, in Brussels, and abroad with our regional offices. Thank you all for coming to this event and for showing your interest in this important issue. I wish all of us a very fruitful and interesting discussion, helping us to define the necessary policies for maritime security in East Asia. Thank you very much, and now I hand over to Professor Tokushi.
Well, Dr. Fischer-Bolin, thank you very much for your kind introduction. Thank you very much. Am Anfang möchte ich nur ein bisschen auf Deutsch sprechen, in order to pay respect to the Konrad Adenauer Foundation and also Germany. Guten Tag allerseits. Ich heiße Hideshi Tokushi, Präsident des Institutes für Friedens- und Sicherheitsstudien Japans. Herzlich willkommen zu diesem Symposium. Ich danke Ihnen, dass Sie sich die Zeit genommen haben, um an dieser Konferenz teilzunehmen. Unser Institut ist sehr erfreut, diese Konferenz in Berlin gemeinsam mit der Konrad Adenauer Stiftung auszurichten. Europäische Sicherheit und asiatische Sicherheit sind untrennbar miteinander verbunden. Und in der heutigen Welt kann kein Land allein für seine eigene Sicherheit sorgen. Starke Partnerschaften sind notwendig. Russlands Aggression gegen die Ukraine lehrt uns diese Lektion. Europa und Asien sind auch über das Meer miteinander verbunden. Es ist daher von großer Bedeutung, dass wir über die maritime Sicherheit in Ostasien diskutieren. Wir möchten mehr zur Entwicklung der Beziehungen zwischen Japan und Deutschland, zwischen Asien und Europa und zwischen dem Indo-Pazifischen und dem Euro-Atlantischen Raum beitragen. Now, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this symposium. Thank you very much for coming out of your very busy schedule. The Research Institute for Peace and Security of Japan is very much honored to be able to host this conference with Konrad Adenauer Stiftung today. I'm truly grateful to the assistance and hospitality of the Stiftung. Thank you. European security and Asian security are inseparably connected with each other. In today's world, no one country can achieve its national security all by itself. robust partnership are indispensable. Russian invasion of Ukraine tells us these lessons. Europe and Asia are connected by the sea. Thus, it is meaningful for us to discuss East Asian maritime security together. At the same time, we would like to contribute further to the development of the relationship between Japan and Germany, between Asia and Europe, and between the Indo-Pacific and Euro-Atlantic regions. And this morning, we made rich discussion on the changing international order and East Asian regional security, as well as how we can cooperate to maintain and strengthen the rules-based international order, particularly in the East Asian maritime space in the closed sessions. Based on the discussion in the morning, we would like to explore the possibility of fruitful and substantive maritime security cooperation in East Asia together with the audience to build a bridge over the troubled water. We are very lucky to have this terrific group of 5 distinguished panelists, as already Dr. Fischer-Bohling introduced. Mr. Alexander Radovan, member of the German Bundestag, thank you very much for coming. Dr. Alexandra Sakaki, Deputy Head of Research Division, Stiftung Wissenschaften und Politik, thank you very much for coming. And Ms. Sumati Parmar, Senior Fellow, Maritime Institute of Malaysia, thank you. And Professor James Kraska, Chair of the Stockton Center for International Law at the US Naval War College, thank you very much. And Admiral Tomohisa Takei, former Chief of Staff of Japan's Maritime Self-Defense Force, thank you very much for coming as well. I'd like to thank all the panelists for joining us today. And each panelist has 5 minutes for their initial remarks. And after we hear all the presentations, we would like to start discussion. And I've heard that Mr. Radovan, you have to leave here at 5 o'clock, right? So please, you go first. And I know that you visited Japan and Tokyo very recently as a member of the CDU delegation, and I met in Tokyo as well. And so I'd like to hear your view about the recent development of the security strategy and policy of Japan, and could you share with us about your view about the possible German-Japan or Japan-Europe security cooperation, particularly in terms of maritime security in East Asia. So please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. Geht's, oder? So thank you very much for the invitation of the Konrad Adenauer Foundation today, but also to the visit to Tokyo, where we met and where we had the discussion about these topics, and I get some insights in the discussion in Japan. Let me start with a comparison between Germany and Japan, because we are facing a similar challenge. We have the same history, and Japan until today, but also we had since today a very pacifistic approach. So this called Zeitenwende, I don't know if there's a Japanese word for it, is happening in our society, in the society in Japan, but also in the society in Germany. So we are facing that our surrounding is getting more and more aggressive. When we think about Japan, we are always looking, of course, to the conflict to China and Taiwan, but you have another neighbor, this is Russia. A lot of people in Germany don't think about it, and therefore I'm very thankful, and Germany is very thankful, that after the Russian war started with Ukraine, Japan immediately was on the side on the Ukrainians, on Europe and the US. We know it was a difficult approach to discuss with other big countries, also the region, to support it, but it was no doubt that Japan supports the sanctions against Russia and to oppose it. So we have to learn that we have to be still self-responsible for our security in the future. This is, of course, we are not alone. Maybe this is also a difference between Europe and China, because we have the European Union and we want to get a common approach to give an answer to this Russian invasion. When I see the situation in Japan, Japan is looking to all the other countries, mainly the big countries like, for example, Australia, India, Indonesia. The small countries in the neighborhood like South Korea or others are not so much in the focus. This is, and I said it also in Japan, coming from the European history, where we have overcome the Second World War. I think it's still a challenge in Asia to support each other. I think what also is important for the maritime security in Asia is that the countries are responsible also for the security of other countries. So when we look to NATO, paragraph 5, that says if one country is attacked, all countries are attacked, and then all countries will defend it. This is what in the Western world, in Europe and the US, is seen as normal. Not looking what's happening in November in the US, but till now it's normal. I think this discussion has maybe started in Japan, but it's still a long way to have the solidarity. I have two comparisons with Japan and with Germany, which are similar, where we have to learn. One thing is with the Russian invasion, and this goes beyond the question of maritime security, is that we have faced the situation with Russia that we were very dependent of one country of energy, for example, it's with Russia. And this is the same with China. And Japan is more involved in the Chinese economy than Germany is. We have hard discussions in Germany, and we have discussed the decoupling and de-risking of China. And Japan is much more involved in the Chinese economy. So it was interesting for me to learn also in Japan that you have a strong discussion about the security and the politics with China, but you have not such hard discussions of the questions of de-risking and decoupling with China. Your companies want still to make their money in China, and I think with Taiwan it's similar. And one point which we are facing is that what we have learned on the 21st of January 2 years ago, that for the security in Europe, we have to have the Americans on our side. Without the Americans, Russia would go through Ukraine, and we think they will keep on going. Since the 7th of October, we have a conflict not far away, it's in Europe and to Japan, in Gaza, where also the US is very much involved. We know that one of the highest priorities of the US is the security in Asia. And they are facing the big challenge of China. And the question mark we are raising is, how much conflicts can America manage? Because they are the largest superpower in the world, in economics, in financial, but also in the military, but also sometimes their capacity is limited. And I hope they can make all three, but we shouldn't swear on it, that they can manage all three conflicts. And therefore, we have to come to a point, we have lost 2 years in Germany and in Europe to be more self-responsible and to spend more, but not only in money, also the discussion in the society, in the army, to make it clear that Europe is able to defend themselves against any aggression coming from anywhere. And there, of course, is Europe our priority, but at the end, we know that also the peace is essential in Asia for our economy, but also for our values. And therefore, I hope that Japan, and I'm optimistic in Germany and Europe, will cooperate more, and also in the area of aircrafts and other army arms technologies, we should come closer together.
Mr. Erdogan, thank you very much for your very, very important remarks, and you hit very, probably almost all the important points, including sharing responsibility between Europe and Asia, and also the difference of security architectures between Europe and East Asia, and also the economic security issues, and also the role of the United States. Probably, Professor Graska will have some, comments about those points. But anyway, thank you very much for very, very important remarks. Much appreciated. And in the interest of time, so I would like to hand over the microphone to Dr. Alexandra Sakaki. Alexandra, 5 minutes, please.
All right. Thank you very much for the introduction and for having me. So I thought I would focus on Germany's and to some extent Europe's role in maritime issues in Asia. And for the sake of discussion, let me structure it around 3 points. The first point that I'd like to make briefly, I think, is that if you look at the German debate, I think maritime issues are increasingly in the public domain and being discussed, and that's not natural. If you look at Germany, Germany has long in its policy making had a continental focus, and it's not regarded as a traditional sea power. But recently we've had many maritime issues, starting with the Gulf of Aden piracy incidents, and then Nord Stream pipeline explosion, and most recently the Houthi rebels. So I think the vulnerability to shipping and vulnerability for maritime infrastructure is increasingly entering the German debate. So I've heard some people from the maritime establishment in Germany talk about sea blindness by Germany, meaning kind of a lack of consciousness in the public and also in the policy-making domain about the importance of the maritime issues. But I think slowly, triggered by those events, I think Germany is shedding some of its sea blindness, perhaps. Second point I'd like to make is on the maritime security issues in East Asia. The Indo-Pacific policy guidelines that were issued in 2020 highlight the importance of sea lanes of communication in Asia for Germany and for Europe. And they say that any disruption to those sea lanes in the Indo-Pacific would have grave consequences for Germany. So I think given the tensions that we see in East Asia, Germany really needs to look at the tendencies in the region. There's a myriad of challenges in East Asia in the maritime domain, but I think still the most important is the so-called China's so-called gray zone activities or coercive actions that challenge another state's sovereignty or rights or territorial integrity. If we look at both the East China Sea and the South China Sea, China's presence is increasing both in numbers and types of vessels. So its presence is more robust than ever before. And given the tensions, I think it's not hard to imagine that any contingency could escalate and cause regional instability. And of course, Chinese activities also disregard long-standing norms and thus have implications for order at sea. I think the Russian invasion of Ukraine has made Europeans more aware of the interconnectedness between East Asian or Asian security and European security, especially with Chinese and Russian increasing cooperation. And I think as a result, Europeans have also become more sympathetic to security concerns voiced by Asian countries that point to an erosion of the international order. Finally, I'd like to briefly talk about what Europeans or Germany can do in terms of maritime security in Asia. I think there's a number of things that Germany has already, and other European countries as well, have done over the recent years that I think can be expanded on. The most visible step, of course, by engagement by Germany and other European countries has been the deployment of naval vessels to the region. So from May to December this year, Germany is planning to send another frigate to the Indo-Pacific along with a support ship this time. And I think this is really a notable step given the severely limited number of ships that Germany has at its disposition. The operational contribution of such naval deployments may be somewhat limited, but I think they are important signals of reassurance to like-minded countries like Japan about Europe's commitment to regional security and also to building interoperability with those partners. Secondly, in that context, Germany is planning to contribute to the monitoring of UN sanctions on North Korea through the so-called Enforcement Coordination Cell that's located in Japan. And I think this participation in particular is valuable for Germany and other European countries because it allows to get a better sense of the maritime trends in the region. So I hope that Germany will consider permanently posting a liaison officer in that context. Finally, capacity building is also an important area where Europeans can do more. So Germany has already built some of the, or helped build some of the Coast Guard capabilities, for example, in the Philippines and Malaysia, and it has also offered legal training to Southeast Asian representatives. So I think here also more coordination with Japan would be a good step. Finally, I think it's important to note that by playing a role in those territorial conflicts in Asia, Europeans are also contributing to internationalizing maritime disputes in Asia, thereby countering China's attempts to prevail through power asymmetries in a bilateral approach. So Europeans can address these issues, for example, at G7 meetings and other multilateral meetings. So I think this helps to internationalize these disputes. And I'll stop here and look forward to the discussion.
Alexandra, thank you very much for your kind of very important remarks. Thank you. And thank you very much for being specific about the cooperation between Japan and Europe or Japan and Germany. Thank you. And also, it is important to note that internationalization of maritime dispute in East Asia is very, and that's a very important point actually, because as always, as all of us know, the Permanent Court of Arbitration in The Hague, rendered a very historic ruling on the South China Sea dispute in July 2016. But that is almost a history because I think that's why the Chinese government issued a new map, describing 10-dash line, because just after the rendering of the ruling of the Permanent Court of Arbitration, China became a little bit silent because it raised the reputation cost of China. So I think it is very, very important to keep, institutionalizing, false argument of China or any other countries which are against the rules-based international law. Anyway, thank you. Thank you very much. So the next speaker, Ms. Smathi of Malaysia. Smathi, you have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you very much, Cass and RIPS, for inviting me and to hear perspective from Southeast Asia. So my presentation basically will cover a perspective of ASEAN states on maritime security issues after the Russian-Ukraine war. So what is the common shared interest between Germany, Japan and Southeast Asia is the maritime security is an enduring interest in Asia, but for many reasons, because maritime security supports international shipping. Maritime security is needed to keep the ocean safe from non-traditional security issues, and also ocean governance for other maritime issues like environmental security, to withstand the adverse impact from climate change and so on. So maritime security encompasses multifaceted issues, and it is a shared interest between Europe and Southeast Asia, and also between any ocean-going countries or maritime nations. But what has changed is that the region is going through notable challenges, including global inflation and threats posed by a number of conflicts. So the conflict, of course, it is aggravated by the Russian-Ukraine war in Europe that has actually affected the global supply chain, as well as increasing the price of goods, commodities and maritime transportation costs and services. The Federation of Malaysia, for example, have done a survey recently and found out that at least 56% of the members from the Federation sees the war had an impact on business. The hardest industry includes shipping and logistics. So this comprises in-business costs, increase in price of raw materials, delays which Malaysian ports actually have faced, and many other causes for insurance and so on, that actually has not only increase in businesses but also ripple effect to the services, the supply chain and logistics. And this is further aggravated by the Israel-Palestine conflict that has also have a ripple effect in the Red Sea, which has also disrupting the global trade. So for another conflict in Asia, coming from incidents between China and other operating navies or coast guards in Asia, will definitely have a devastating impact further to complicate the existing conflict in Europe and also elsewhere. So despite the importance of maintaining a maritime security and providing support for open, free and undisrupted operation, the geostrategic rivalry between the US and China is well known, and South China Sea has been the a great theater for projection of power. And of late, what we observe is not only the narrative of China and US, but this has also been aggravated by many other Indo-Pacific strategy goals and also deployments that are taking place in the South China Sea, which is in a way, I think from a claimant perspective, or from a small state that is actually facing the bigger China, Chinese operation, Chinese Coast Guard vessels presence in our EEZ, in our own waters. I think it is good because it could avoid a unilateral balance of China in the South China Sea. But at the same time, I think the fear from Southeast Asia is also that the South China Sea could fall into a region of conflict like what we are witnessing in Europe and elsewhere. So I think that is also a concern from ASEAN and also Southeast Asian countries to how do we deal with such a multitude activities of great power in our region. So that is my second point. And throughout 2023, as I mentioned, China is aggressive, China is assertive in the South China Sea. There are several incidents involving dangerous incident involving Philippines and the Chinese Coast Guard, Philippines and Vietnam, and also in Malaysia, China's Coast Guard is present 24/7 in our Luconia shore, that is within the southernmost tip of Chinese 9-9 claim, and we have recorded the number of days, the number of activities China is actually present, and despite the protests, despite the formal diplomatic rebuke, China is still there. So despite this flare-up, ASEAN and China is not letting down their effort on the code of conduct. So China is actually expecting to conclude the code in 2026, and Southeast Asian nations, including Malaysia, remain consistent in promoting dialogue and common interests, which is to maintain and promote peace and security and stability in Southeast Asia. In December 2023, I think I should mention, the ASEAN Foreign Minister recalled and affirmed their stance to promote peace, security and stability in this region through dialogue and not through activities. So I would like to conclude that the maritime security cooperation has become more urgent, especially to withstand the effects of Russian-Ukraine war and to decrease any more further pressure on the disrupted maritime supply chain and the increased commodity price. A report by the Defense Security Asia in 2023 actually listed Malaysia among the 29 nations worldwide that is Russia-friendly. But despite this listing and how Malaysia has been rather quiet in its position on Russia invasion of Ukraine, I think the long-term cautious still exists. That the long-term impacts to the economic pressure and strategic ambiguity against Russian-friendly power is China is still there. Thank you very much.
Well, Sumathi, thank you. Thank you very much for pointing out the diversity and the diverse aspect of the concept of maritime security. I think it's a very important point, and particularly for the Southeast Asian. And also, thank you very much for being very candid about the Southeast Asian concern about the great power rivalry. Thank you very much. So the next speaker, James, please, 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Takuchi-san, and thank you to the Konrad Adenauer Stiftung and the Research Institute for Peace and Security for the invitation. So just in a few minutes, I'll share what I think is an asymmetric advantage that democratic states and like-minded states have. This is in contrast to my comments in a closed-door meeting this morning about the economic and security problems and often overmatch posed by China and Russia. In particular, China, but also demonstrated by Russia, not just in military capabilities, but the willingness to use force and also to use proxies, including, of course, Iran, but also North Korea, which could not function, certainly would not be a nuclear power without China. And so this overmatch is manifest in many different ways in East Asia and really poses an existential threat to the states in the region. But on the other hand, there is a intangible instrument of power that we have that we could wield more effectively, and that is the legal norms of international law, and in particular of oceans governance. These are focused on the uses of the oceans and the use of force and sovereignty. And these norms have widespread acceptance throughout the world, and they're promoted quite effectively, I would say, by the United States, European Union, NATO countries, Japan, Australia, Korea, and even India. The idea is that the rule of law binds the strong as well as the weak. And there's numerous examples, of course, but I might use the example of India, standing in contrast to China. India had a dispute with Italy over the Enrico Lexi incident, a maritime incident, and they went through a lengthy legal process. They had to deal with some difficult domestic politics, and nonetheless, they submitted to the arbitration and complied with the rule of law. Even in a larger sense, India has participated in the Bay of Bengal case. Didn't get exactly what they wanted. In fact, in India, they thought that they had lost, maybe even somewhat unfairly in maritime boundaries with their neighbors. Nonetheless, they complied with the rule of law. And so this is a very strong example, I think, that resonates throughout the world. China has a different view, which is that the law is the weapon of the strong to control the weak, and it believes that the best example of this is the United States, that the United States created an international order in order to be able to dominate it, and that international law is an instrument to be wielded, to essentially assert your way. China, of course, has not participated in the South China Sea arbitration. Russia is and seeks to upset or modify rules for the law of the sea. Likewise, Russia has not complied with the rules or the norms on state sovereignty or the use of force. And what's interesting about these is not that that they have violated or acting consistently with the law, but that no one else is with them. To the extent that states accept what Russia or China is doing, they only do so from either a transactional standpoint. They just don't want to anger one of these countries in order to risk some type of economic transaction, or they are autocratic states that want to avail themselves of these same sorts of violations. Nonetheless, China has suffered actual considerable reputational damage from the 9-dash line, even as it tries to pervert or transform the law of the sea. You heard several examples operating in other countries' exclusive economic zones, trying to claim territorial entitlements, not only from areas that don't generate them, such as Laconia Shoals or Scarborough Shoal or Macclesfield Bank, underwater features that don't generate any type of territorial sea or exclusive economic zone, but they do so in the areas under the jurisdiction of their neighbors. So no states accept these. Usually they're just glad that it's not them, that someone else is the focus. And so what can we do? Continue to advance the rule of law and the law of the sea, continue to call out China in areas such as the operations inside the territorial sea of its neighbors, Japan, for example, with the Senkaku Islands. And with this, there's numerous institutions that all of us, all states ought to be more active and more visible in speaking up on these violations. Thank you.
Well, James, thank you very much for your very powerful discussion about the importance of international law. In today's world, it is very easy to say that international law is powerless in light of the Russian invasion of Ukraine, but in fact, law and norm, that is exactly the basis of the strong reprimand of Russian invasion of Ukraine, and it is without international law, our daily life is almost impossible. So the assertion that international law is powerless is wrong, I think. So we have to recognize the importance of international law. Thank you very much. And then, Admiral Takei, you have 5 minutes, please.
Thank you very much. I'd like to speak about what implication does the war in Ukraine have to partnership between Europe and East Asia on maritime security. The Ukraine war has been fought mainly on land and rarely at sea due to Russia and Ukraine's asymmetric naval forces. There are few chances for sea combat. However, there are 4 events that the maritime countries need to consider for maintaining maritime security. First, we reaffirmed if security risk lies in resource-rich region, which inevitably affect the world that is becoming more and more connected in various ways. The war in Ukraine raised the price of wheat and corn as well as energy prices. There have been 2 oil shocks in the past in 1973 and 1979 with epicenter in the Middle East. While developing countries' reliance on fossil energy has increased dramatically in the decades due to their steady economic development, if the next oil shock occurs with the Gulf region as epicenter again, its impact would be greater than the previous ones. Second, it reaffirmed the historical fact that if the war breaks out in a semi-enclosed sea such as Black Sea, the impact would extend to all coastal countries. The Turkish government locked down the Bosphorus Strait based on Montreux Convention of 1936 has been effectively de-escalate the war, which reassured significance of maritime order based on international law. The United States increased its deployed forces in the Asian Sea and Mediterranean Sea by about 30%, as the crisis in Ukraine escalated, and NATO maritime forces deployed 3 carrier groups to the outside the Black Sea and the Baltic Sea to prevent war from spreading into the outer seas. These incidents demonstrate maintaining maritime order and the rule of international law, and joint multilateral activity are key to maintaining maritime securities. Third, if the war breaks on in the future, the telecommunication infrastructure will be top priority target of attack, both kinetic and non-kinetic means. Fourth, hybrid warfare is also being waged at sea with extensive use of drones and missiles, which previously possessed only by regular military forces. Then, what we should do to meet emerging maritime situations? I think there are 3. The first is a joint commitment to peace and stability in resource-rich regions such as the Middle East. Adding to the Middle East, we should consider that Taiwan as a center of semiconductor manufacturing, as a technology resource region, and cooperatively commit ourselves to peace and stability across Taiwan region, as well as South China Sea and East China Sea. The second is a shared concept of maritime security patiently. The maritime security is a relatively new concept that are developed by industrial maritime countries, and even rule-based maritime order is not fully shared in the world. Third is secure the seabed infrastructure, such as optic submarine cables and the pipeline with cooperation of countries concerned. Optic submarine cables are usually laid over the shortest possible distance between landing points, therefore generally located in the same water where the main sea lines of communications are. We need to expand protection of sea lines of communication to 4 domains: air, sea, undersea, and seabed. The maritime country located on the periphery of the Eurasian continent, from Europe through the Indian Ocean to East Asia, are expected to cooperate to secure undersea infrastructures. Thank you very much.
Well, Admiral Takei, thank you. Thank you very much for your great remarks. And actually, I'm very much interested in hearing your views about the Japan's maritime self-defense forces' contribution to the peace and stability in the Southeast Asia, South China Sea, if possible, based on your long-time service to the Japanese self-defense forces. But before that, it is almost 7 minutes before 5 o'clock. So before, Mr. Altman, before you leave, I'd like to ask you a question about this topic. My question is about Taiwan issue, because Taiwan is part of the first island chain, and at the same time, Taiwan is sits just between the East China Sea and South China Sea. And today, Taiwan's economic importance, particularly in semiconductors and high tech, that's undisputable. And of course, long time ago in the Cold War age, one American intellectual said that Taiwan is equivalent to West Berlin, and actually Taiwan is already a full-fledged democracy and exposed to the threat of China. And I'd like to hear your view about German policy, and particularly security policy in relation to the situation across the Taiwan Strait.
I think it works. I think the situation, the position from Germany is clear that we have one China, two states, two systems, and I think this is crucial for us. And Taiwan is, as you mentioned, is from the technological side, is a democracy. Therefore, it is, of course, indisputable that China could attack Taiwan. We need also the maritime sea. It's one of the largest seas, important parts in the world for the ship traffic to Europe and to Asia. And this is what has to be defended and has to be clear for us that this is possible and will stay.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Actually, Mr. Erdogan talked about various issues. So if there is a question from the other panelists.
I have a question to Mr. Erdogan, it's okay?
Yeah, okay. Please, just 1 minute, please.
Yeah. So Germany heavily depended on the Russian natural gas at the beginning of, at just break of the Ukraine war. I think Russia will intimidate your country by natural gas, or some use of natural gas export to other cognitive warfare. Yeah, German hesitate to intervene in the Ukraine. How do you overcome this intimidation or some cognitive warfare from Russia?
Unfortunately, I have to say I don't got the question totally. Maybe you can help me.
It's okay. Germany import natural gas from Russia. Maybe more than 40% of your natural gas come from Russia in the beginning of the Ukraine war. And Russia might use the natural gas export as a tool to German hesitate, refrain from intervening the Ukraine, or some use of cognitive warfare to control your mindset, to hesitate the intervention. How did Germany overcome this intimidation?
I think this is what I mentioned in my opening remarks, that one of the main lessons which we have learned from Germany was our big dependence of Russia in the field of energy. And they have tried to use it as a weapon against us. We have overcome it because we had the possibility to get alternatives from other countries. And also I think that the winter was not too cold. But still our industry in some areas is suffering there, especially for example, the chemistry industry. But now we are looking and hardly working on alternatives, starting from Norway, from Great Britain, from Canada, from the US, to be independent from Russia, but it shows us that other countries stepped in. So we know that India or other countries or China also are getting now the gas from Russia. And also, I said at the beginning, we are very thankful that Japan supported us in the UN resolutions, but there is still a common gas field in East Russia, which Japan and Russia are exploring together. So you know better than we do that one side are the political interests and the other side are the economic interests.
That is why I asked.
So therefore we know this. And I think we all have to work then to be independent. This doesn't mean a decoupling or a de-risking. And in the area of Russia, it's more or less simple with energy. With China and Taiwan, it is very complex.
Yeah.
Because when we are very dependent on these two countries, and when this conflict starts, the whole economy worldwide will suffer. And this is now the questions beside the questions of the military side. What can we do that the pressure on us, if the conflict comes, is not too big? And this is where we both have, Japan and Germany, Europe and Japan have to work on.
Well, Mr. Erdogan, thank you. Thank you very much for your contribution. Thank you very much. Well, it's 5 o'clock, so 1 hour to go. So I'd like to open the floor to questions and comments. And thank you very much. I'd like to take several questions, so please go ahead.
So first question would be...
could you identify you first?
I'm just privately here, I'm just politically interested. I'm a citizen of Berlin, my name is Volker Schmidt. So first question is, how about the situation Japan-China? How dependent is Japan economically, especially on China? You mentioned our dependency or our past dependency on Russian natural gas. So this is one trade good, but how much is it possible really to decouple Japan from China, especially if the conflict in the South Chinese Sea would escalate? And what is the role of the maritime court in Hamburg actually? Does China not accept the court at all? Or is it just taking the freedom to accept any decision of the court if it likes it, or just refuse it if it doesn't like it? What's the position of China to this court? Especially regarding the situation of the South China Sea, of course.
Any other questions? Yes, please.
Yes, hello. My name is Alex Oper-Hermann. I study political science here at the Free University of Berlin. And I was wondering, because already the role of NATO in Europe has been addressed, do you see do the panelists see a likelihood that something such as the Quad, the mini quadrilateral between India, South Korea, Japan, and the US, could eventually form into something like an Asian NATO, the thing that China is always concerned about and always fearmongers over?
Right. Alessio?
Alessio Bernardo from King's College London. First of all, thank you very much all the panelists for the very insightful conversation so far. I have a question to Amelta Kay. How is Japan approaching the challenge of critical undersea infrastructure protection? What is the general approach? We know in Europe from the experience with Nord Stream 2 and other undersea pipelines, as well as the cutting of cables in places like the Shetland Islands, and this is becoming a growing concern. How is Japan approaching it, and do you see cooperation over critical undersea infrastructure protection as a potential area of development of ties between Japan and Europe?
All right. Next question. Yes, please.
Yeah, Carl Pilny. I'm heading a think tank called the Asia Strategy Institute, and I lived in Japan for several years. I'm broadly speaking interested in your perspective on a future conflict between Japan and Russia over the Kurils, and to have your take on a comparison to the risk of a Chinese-Japanese problem in the background of the increasing collaboration and cooperation of Russia and China. Do you think in one distant day in the future there may even be a concerted action by both countries, or do you think there is more risk on the Japan-China side or the Russia-Japan side? Thank you.
All right, yeah.
My name is Falk Völl. I'm a lawyer in southern Germany. I have a question on the CETO. Does it still exist? Which role does it play? I heard there is the CETO, like, as a NATO alternative, and yeah.
All right. There are, I think, 5 questions. China-Japan relationship, role of NATO, undersea infrastructure, and future possibility of conflict between Japan and Russia, and CETO, and so. There are 5 questions at least. So, who goes first? Azatake?
Thank you for wonderful and very difficult to answer the question. First one, the economic relation between China and Japan. As Mr. Rodwan mentioned, the connection, the economic connection between 2 countries is too tight. So I think the Japan is heavily depend on Chinese economy this time. So Japanese government established the economy security policy strategy that the main objective is to reduce the too much depend on the one country about economically. So the Japanese government, including a private company, now de-risking China's risk to diversify the supply chain out of China. That's the first one. I have some chance to speak to the board member of private company in Japan. They don't recognize some sensitivity. The President Xi Jinping instructed their military leadership to be ready to Taiwan invasion by 2027. They don't want to believe this one. However, on the other hand, they have planned to do the evacuation of employees from China and Taiwan when something happens. So they understand the necessity to de-risking China, and also that they want to keep the current Japan-China economic situation without any trouble. Second one is Asian NATO. Is it right? It is old but new issues for the country in the Western Pacific regions. I think this is a high time to discuss these issues, not NATO, but the multilateral cooperation to deter or to keep the peace and stability in this region. It is high time to discuss these issues. Now, the US and the South Korea have agreed the Washington Declaration to improve the extended deterrence posture in the United States to the Korean Peninsula. I think it is a good time in Japan to participate in the bilateral one and make it trilateral one, and it enhance the extended deterrence more credible. And as for the India, the very important and influential country, but I think India does not want to make a NATO type the military association with Japan and the other country. However, India has capability to responsibility to maintain the peace and stability around Indian Ocean, because Indian Ocean is named after India. So India's Navy has a great friendship with the coastal country, the Indian Ocean. It is a key to maintain the Indian Ocean is one of the responsibility to the Indian Navy and the India. And also, I said again, the Asian NATO is old but new issues, but we have to find some kind of multilateral cooperation to maintain, keep peace and stability in these regions. The third is the question to me, how to protect the critical undersea infrastructures. I I think the UNCLOS prescribe the coastal country responsibility to protect the undersea infrastructure. This is one of the issues for Professor Kraska. But I think the coastal country does not establish any special law to protect the undersea infrastructure. Optic undersea cable is one of the good examples. So my idea is that each country need to cooperate to discuss these issues and how important the undersea structure, either the steady economic growth or some peace and stability in these regions. And next step is maybe there are some country who has many undersea cable landing, like Japan, Taiwan, and South Korea, and India as well. So these countries cooperatively discuss how to protect these issues from the destruction. And this is the first step. Next is the exchange information, this matters. And third step is, this is the global issues, to strengthen the infrastructure itself from the destructions. Fourth is some future risk of war. Russia and Japan, and maybe China and Japan and North Korea. I think the situation in Europe, the Japan is the worse than that of Europe, because Japan faces the countries who want to change status quo, that is Russia, China, and North Korea. And the last year's meeting, President Putin and North Korea leader Kim Jong-un at the space center in Far East Russia, I think it was the timing that three countries make access about changing status quo. And I don't believe the North Korea want to change status quo by itself. But something happened in the Taiwan Strait or the South China Sea. I think North Korea might think this is the timing to change status quo in the Korean Peninsula. We should be careful about some movement of North Korea from now on. Anyway, the situation is rapidly changing after President Putin and leader Kim Jong-un met last year. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. And actually, I have a small comment to the issue of economic security. Some years ago, two officers of the Chinese People's Liberation Army wrote a very famous book, Unrestricted Warfare. And according to those two officers, there is no boundary between war and peace, and no boundary between military and non-military. So anything can be weaponized. So economic statecraft is one of the very strong weapons of the Chinese right now. And at the same time, China is fully integrated into the world economy. And in fact, particularly in the Asia Pacific, China is the economic hub of the entire region. So, it is impossible to contain China. It's very different from the former Soviet Union in the Cold War age. So it is inevitable to make a economic partnership with China, but the partnership with those authoritarian states is not risk-free. Therefore, we have to be resilient, and also we have to have competitiveness. So that's the essence, resilience and competitiveness. That's they are the two essence, or two points of essence in the economic security law of Japan, and also of the national security strategy of Japan, which was established in 2022. Well, let's see. Alexandra?
Yeah, thank you. Let me also add some thoughts on the economic dependence on China issue. I think Japan's external trade is about maybe 24 or 25% of that is with China. So clearly dependence is high. But I think what's important to recognize is that Japan, after the 2012 so-called nationalization of the Senkaku Islands, China reacted with this ban on, or more or less ban on rare earths. And that really triggered Japan to think more about where its dependence is with China and what the critical items are in that dependence. So I think, for example, on rare earths, Japan has worked very hard to reduce that dependence on China. So the 26% or 25%, I don't know exactly, percent of external trade with China, we have to ask what is behind that to really know Japan's dependence. And there's also in the economic security legislation and the policies that Japan pursues, one aspect which I find very interesting, which doesn't come up so much in the German debates yet, is the aspect of strategic indispensability. So Japan is not only thinking about where its dependence is on China, but also where China's dependence is on Japan, and where Japan might have a leverage on China. So I think this is also an important aspect that we need to consider when we talk about dependence. And finally, one point that I think the Germans also realized when they had government consultations with Japan is that we can't just look at the external trade, but we also have to put that into perspective of the domestic market. Now, Japan's domestic market is much bigger than Germany's, so that 25% of trade with China put into perspective when we also consider the domestic market is yet another difference between Germany and Japan. On the whether there might be a NATO kind of organization forming in Asia, I don't see that happening. I think actually rather than Quad, the most likely perhaps should be some kind of alliance, trilateral alliance between the US and Japan and South Korea, which are the most important US allies in the region, and that also have a very clear common concerns about both Russia and China, and to some extent also Russia. But we know that the relationship between Japan and Korea is very difficult for historical reasons and other issues. And likewise, I think with the Quad, if you look exactly at each country in that grouping, you'll see that there's a lot of hurdles that would need to be overcome to actually create some kind of common defense mechanism. So rather than that kind of formal NATO kind of organization forming in Asia, I think it's going to be a bit more messy with bilateral and minilateral cooperation in various fields and kind of countries working to create some kind of deterrence effect through that. And finally, on China and Russia in the region, clearly China and Russia share a lot of interests in weakening the US alliance system in Asia. They try to divide the alliances or alliance partners. They try to put an operational burden on Japan and other countries in the region. So clearly they have common goals, but not completely aligned, of course. Whether there might be a concerted action, I don't see that really though, because I mean, if we think about the Kuril Islands are already under Russian control, so Russia doesn't have, I mean, they are active in the region militarily, but they don't have to move into the islands anymore, whereas China is obviously challenging Japan's administrative control of the Senkaku, so the situation is different. But nevertheless, the danger is that if there's a conflict in the region, that China might use that to further its goals on the Senkakus as well. So in general, there's that risk, I think. I'll stop there. And
all right, thank you very much. In Asia or in the Pacific region, the US-centered alliance system is the stabilizer of the entire region. And it is a bunch of bilateral alliance relationships such as Japan, US, US-Korea, the US-Philippines, and US-Australia, and US-Thailand, those kind of bilateral alliance relations. But it is more networked than ever before. Although the relationship between South Korea and Japan is a little bit shaky or unstable, as Alexandra mentioned, but already last August, the leaders of the three countries, Japan, US, and Korea, met together in Camp David and issued a very important document called the Spirit of Camp David. And in that document, those three countries committed to consult with each other on various types of contingencies in the region and consider measures in response. So it's a very important message to all in the region. Actually, the similar message is included in the bilateral document between the United Kingdom and Japan, which was launched on the sideline of the G7 Hiroshima summit last year. It is called the Hiroshima Accord. So it is the UK-Japan relationship, security relationship, is much closer than ever before. And the similar thing can be said about the relationship between Australia and Japan, and as well. In October 2022, the Japan and Australia concluded and renewed the Joint Declaration on Security Cooperation. In that JDSC, we can find the similar language about consulting with each other on contingencies and consider response in joint response. So it's very similar. It's becoming very similar to alliance relationship. So it's a very positive development of the situation, but still it is uncertainties. So we have to see what will happen in the future. But anyway, it's very important point, I think. Well, Smithy, you have any comments? No. So James.
Did you want me to? I can address just the issue of ITLOS and undersea infrastructure. So. The International Tribunal for the Law of the Sea in Hamburg was created by the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea. China is a party to the convention. So the convention is somewhat unique in that it requires mandatory or compulsory dispute resolution, which means that unlike the International Court of Justice, you do not require the consent of a state in order to bring a state party before some type of procedure. ITLOS is one of those procedures, the institution in Hamburg, but the default procedure is an Annex 7 arbitration composed of a panel of 5 arbitrators, and that's what the South China Sea went to, and China lost that 5-0, and it was held at the Permanent Court of Arbitration in The Hague. With regard to undersea infrastructure, what leverage can you get from the law? There's a liability regime for damage of undersea cables and pipelines in the Law of the Sea Convention, but of course that requires attribution, that you know who did it, because you cannot impose liability unless you know who did it. Furthermore, violation of this regime is not a use of force, and so there's no sort of right of self-defense or anything like that. If you can attribute the attack, then the victim state can adopt reparations and impose countermeasures to try to get fulfillment or inducement of those reparations. Finally, there is, under the Submarine Cables Treaty of 1888, there is a boarding regime under Article 10 that allows the coastal state to go out and board vessels that are suspected of breaking submarine cables or pipelines, such as this recent Chinese vessel that was in the Baltic. That would have been an opportunity to exercise that provision. It's only been used one previous time, in 1959. The United States warship USS Hale, H-A-L-E, boarded a Soviet fishing trawler that was in the vicinity of a number of cable breaks.
James, thank you very much. So I'd like to proceed to the next round of Q&As. Admiral Chauhan?
Thank you very much. I am Vice Admiral Chauhan from the National Maritime Foundation in New Delhi, in India. I actually wanted to offer a comment and then seek opinions, especially from my friend Admiral Take. If you look at the title, the aftermath of the Russian invasion of the Ukraine has served more than anything else to highlight the risks posed by China. Now, if you accept that proposition, then the risk posed by China is not in any way functional upon the maritime security of East Asia alone. And responses to China, therefore, cannot be limited to a sub-region of the Indo-Pacific. And since the countries concerned all have similar approaches to the geographical extremities of the Indo-Pacific, I think that we need to understand, therefore, that dealing with China, whether in combat terms or in pre-combat terms, requires at least a regional approach. In this regional approach, the Pacific Ocean is perhaps the eastern segment of the Indo-Pacific. The Indian Ocean is the western segment of the Indo-Pacific. Consequently, when you say that India doesn't wish to create a NATO, you are right. When you say that India is the predominant or at least an influential power in the western segment of the Indo-Pacific, that's a really important statement. Simply because for us, if we keep the sea international shipping lanes or in conflict the sea lines of communication open on the western segment of the Indo-Pacific and interdict exactly the same for China, I think the contribution of this would be perhaps far greater than the seductiveness of simply creating a structure modeled upon an existing structure like NATO. East Asia, comprising, the Russia, China, South and North Korea, and Japan, is a peculiar subset of this entire regional space. If I wanted to actually free up Japanese military assets to better deal with China in the northeastern portion of this Indo-Pacific, once again, the best thing that could be done is for interdiction of Chinese traffic, goods, cargo, merchant ships, to take place on the western extremity. That's how it could be done if we take the regional approach. Of course, we use the word region somewhat freely when we describe any segment of a given region. So if the panel thinks that what I'm saying has some merit, then I would like you to examine whether, as has already been said, whether we could not have a coordinated, and it doesn't have to be messy. These are adjectives which are NATO is not free from messiness. It's about as messy an organization as you can get. And likewise, therefore, messiness is neither here nor there. If coordination is accurately done, only then does it justify the whole business of interoperability between the navies of Japan, of India, of Australia, of the United States, and hopefully in the fullness of time of Europe and Germany and France. If you're getting interoperability and you've never got any intention of ever using that in combat, then I think you're wasting your time. Because I don't think we are wasting time, I think that those things are really important when we actually bring, if push comes to shove, it won't be in a single segment. And the answer to China will not be in a single segment. It will really be across the Indo-Pacific. Thank you.
Sorry. My name is Hans von Plötz. I'm former diplomat, Germany. My last post was Moscow in the good days. And I want to tell you that one of my hobbies in those days was to figure out what the relationship between Russia and China is like in reality. We all have a very broad understanding of their relationship because the top guys meet each other and look friendly to each other. And the study I undertook together with some colleagues was very clear. There is no love lost between Chinese and Russians, which does not exclude political links, economic, military, even exercises and all that. But I would invite you to really look deep under the cover, what is going on and what is in reality not going on. And can I ask you a question regarding Russia? To what extent would our Pacific friends say Russia is a military threat in their region? And maybe some detail about what kind of threat. Of course, the nuclear threat is very mobile, can be very mobile, but there the conventional and the maritime and air force threat, as far as I remember, this is not the main region of activity of the Russians.
All right. Any other questions? Today's audience is very quiet. Well, then, so England, so probably, oh, you can go first. Oh, okay. Yeah, either way. Yeah. Right. Again?
So, the last question about threat from Russia. Biggest change in the year is the Japanese government perception about China. The perception about Russia does not change yet. It's just after the Ukraine war, Japanese government changed the threat perception about Russia. But whether the Russia as a threat imminent to change status quo in the Far East, I don't think so. But currently, Russia's position is the kind of junior partner to China. And China and Russia conducted the joint patrol around Western Pacific by the warplane, also the maritime vessels. This is my the comment. Russia is forcibly participate in the joint patrol by China, by Chinese request. Now in the strategic patrol, China took the lead, and Russia followed about Chinese instruction. The biggest change is the Japanese government change in the position of China as unprecedented and the greatest strategic challenge. It means the near to the threat. North Korea is a serious threat, imminent threat, and Russia is, as you mentioned, is a serious concern. And I don't remember the Japanese government called Russia as a threat. Maybe Japanese government called the Russia as a serious threat, not serious concern like that one.
Well, I'd like to add one comment to what Admiral Takei said. Just as Admiral Takei said, the Japanese perception on Russia has been changed dramatically. In the National Security Strategy of 2022, Russia is a serious concern for the Japanese security. And in contrast, the National Security Strategy of 2013 was much different, because Russia was a partner in every dimension of the relationship between the two countries in that security document. So there was no threat perception described in the 2013 version of the National Security Strategy. In that sense, the threat perception in Russia on the part of Japan has been changed dramatically. But of course, as Admiral Takei said, I think that there is no imminent threat or imminent invasion or military conflict between Japan and Russia. But we have to be vigilant. China and Russia colluding with each other, and they are operating together in the vicinity of the Japanese archipelago. And also, the Russians. The Sea of Okhotsk. It is the place where the Russian nuclear force and naval force are deployed. So once there is a heightened, even much heightened tension between Russia and the United States, there is a possibility that some kind of movement will be seen in the Sea of Okhotsk. So it will affect the Japanese national security as well, I think.
If I could just add a little more fidelity to that. A little more fidelity on, just as an example. Russia really has been serving as a force multiplier for Chinese mischief in East Asia. Perfect example is not an infrequent basis task forces, combined task forces of Russian and Chinese naval forces are transiting from the Sea of Okhotsk, coming down into the Sea of Japan, transiting the Tsugaru Strait, which Japan has a 3 nautical mile territorial sea. This is separating Honshu from Hokkaido, so imagine a task force sometimes as large as 11 or 12 warships, about half of both Russia and China, going through there. Then they head east out to the Aleutian Islands off Alaska and go through straits and territorial seas of the United States, and then swing southward all through Oceania, all through U.S. territories and Oceania independent states, and then enter into the Philippine Sea, flanking the other treaty ally and separating Japan and the Philippines. Taiwan is right in the middle of that, so a strategic position there, and then entering into the East China Sea. So this is not just a one-off. They've started doing it since 2015, and imagine the reaction if any other country transited a warship inside the Chinese territorial sea. The United States has not done so on mainland China in about 25 years. Meanwhile, you have regular occurrences of Chinese forces in its neighbors, EEZs, and even territorial seas. You have Russian warships off the coast of Ireland. You've got constant strategic reconnaissance operations up and down the coast of the Nordic countries. So there really is a level of pressure and a acting in concert that doesn't exist anywhere else. Thanks.
Admiral, do you have any specific response to Admiral Johan's comment?
So my friend, I completely agree with you. And you mentioned some coordination, the segments in the Indo-Pacific region, as it is the key to, especially in the peacetime, in the gray zone situation. We need a concerted effort to keep the current situation peacefully. And also at that time, the Japanese government, Japan expect India to take lead about in the Indian segment. As for Japan, will take lead in the Western Pacific segment as well, and also with coordination with ASEAN countries and South Korea and Philippines as well. And we need some infrastructure to do that, is information sharing or the information exchange. And I believe the Indian Navy lead Information Fusion Center, even in the white shipping data, it is quite important. If it connects the Singapore and Japan, it makes through the picture or white shipping picture in the periphery of the Eurasian continent, from Pacific Ocean to Indian Ocean. This is the one step. And next is exchange the information to some sensitive data. I think it is possible in the future, but not now, because we are now the entrance of discuss these issues. And that's all. Anyway, I'm with you.
James, you have additional comments?
Yeah, just thanks very much, Admiral Chawan, about that. Just to offer a thought, which is oftentimes the United States is told privately, hey, we're with you in a crisis by a number of countries. My suggestion is that ideas like this, states can contribute to deterrence, not by hammering on the church door necessarily and being very visible, but nonetheless, states can contribute to deterrence by raising these prospects publicly, rather than sort of secretly, on the side. I think that's a helpful aspect.
All right, I think, Admiral Johan?
Just a quick two-finger, and that is to say that in most fora, when we discuss things of this nature, we discuss things fully aware that these issues will, from some source or the other, reach the Chinese. This is exactly what we want. So to that extent, the contribution to what you suggest is in fact done. And it is done in a more subtle way, because when we, as Track 1.5 now, develop an idea and articulate it, Track 1 fora has passed the message across, but is always able to deny. That means deniability is very high. You just have to say, that Admiral Chauhan talks too much, finished. But whatever you wanted to convey is conveyed. Thank you.
I'd like to the good diplomats experience in Russia definitely can help in many ways. But your question to the panelists about the Russian threat, from Southeast Asia, maybe we don't see an imminent threat from Russia, but two things that I observe after the Russian invasion of Ukraine is the starting point actually was at sea, one of those starting point of the conflict. Russia's Russian Navy and the Ukrainian Coast Guard actually had a conflict in the Sea of Azov, in the Kerch Strait, and the Russians were blocking the access for Ukrainian Coast Guard and taken them back to the Russian court. So there was a lot of issues between the political attempts to resolve the problem between Russia and Ukraine in the Kerch Strait. And I recall that Ukraine also brought the case to the international court. And here, after the political attempts, and also they first started with the naval operation, then the political attempts, and also after going to the international court, we see a war between Russia and Ukraine. So this is one example that we take in Southeast Asia or in Asia, that such incident should not happen, because this is precisely happening in South China Sea. We see a large, big fleet of China operating in South China Sea, and there are also smaller states, coast guards or fisheries vessels or other US frigates or warships are operating there. So if there is an incident in that area, will there be a possibility of conflict like what happened in the Kerch Strait and in the Sea of Azov will also happen in the South China Sea, or in a more narrow strategic waterways like the Straits of Malacca? If at all any big power like the US or China for some reason block the Straits of Malacca, so how do we, as a neutral state or a smaller state, how do we respond to that? So that is one. Secondly, the biggest lesson that we learn from Russian-Ukraine war is not, it is unlikely to happen in any other area, and especially for big powers like China, who has constantly been defensive against many conflict like China and Japan, China and US on Taiwan contingency and so on. So China has also its own level of pressure that it can handle, and one day China might just decide to do what Russia have done to change the status quo. So that is what I think the biggest lesson, biggest fear that many of Southeast Asian countries are trying to avoid vis-a-vis aftermath the Russian-Ukraine war. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, please, sir.
Yes. If I may very quickly ask James Kraska, because you were alluding to the lack of commitment by Western allies, and the elephant in the room, of course, what do you think a consequence will be when Mr. Trump becomes president, talking about commitment publicly for Western allies? How will that affect in the medium term change the security architecture in the region? And how do you read his personal relationship with Mr. Putin and Xi?
I'm not a political prognosticator by any means. I don't think that he'll become president, personally. But if and he's still referred to as president, by the way. All former presidents are Mr. President. I guess I would ask you what changed when he was president the first time. So Trump tweets a lot, he talks a lot, he's boorish and rude, but I don't expect anything would change, frankly. So, nothing changed the first time. When President Obama was in office, Russia invaded Ukraine the first time. When President Biden came into office, Putin invaded Russia the second time. I don't know if I would attribute that to presidential administrations or not, but all I would say is I don't think it really matters. Trump insulted everybody, including many of the people that voted for him on his own party, and I just don't think it has a material change, frankly.
All right, thank you. Any other comments or questions? No?
I think there was a lady up there.
Sorry, I'm very sorry. Kusunuki-san? I hope that you have many questions. All right? No? No question?
Sorry, I have no preparation for for this moment. From the discussion, I heard the discussion, and what was very important, what was very interesting to me was that somebody questioned about the CETO. Yeah, yes, you asked the same. CETO is one of my interests. I'm basically study political and diplomatic history of Japan. And CETO was, during the 1950s, was one of the Japanese concerns. And the United States established the CETO, Southeast Asian, Southeast Asian Treaty Organization. And the main purpose was to contain China, and the United States and the United Kingdom and France joined the organization. And in the Southeast Asian region, the Thailand, the Pakistan, and one more, I think. That's all?
Australia.
Australia, Thailand, Pakistan, and the Philippines joined the organization. And the United States hoped that the CETO could be like NATO, and expect to function as the regional collective security, and also hoped that Japan, in the future, Japan could join in the CETO, and also that linked other several bilateral security treaties like ANZUS and Japan, US, and the US Korea, the US Philippines, and encompass the whole region to create the NATO-like regional security system. But it actually, consequently, it failed completely. And so many historians asked that why NATO-type alliance was not established in Asia, and many discussions are still going on. And that is one of my interests, and I'm still examining from the historical viewpoint. But the recent, seeing recent developments, the more flexible and multi-layered and multipolar system has been emerged, and I think this kind of very flexible framework will be suited to this region. They are very different from the European situation. So the recent developments could be one of the answers to why the NATO type of the collective security system can't be established. So CETO was, I think, existed until the 1970s, but actually it ceased to function in the early 1960s because of due to the Myanmar situation, and later the Vietnam War, and replaced by the ASEAN. So I like your question very much. So thank you very much.
Well, Professor Tsunuki, thank you very much. Yeah, please.
My name is Wolfgang Kersten. I'm a former teacher here in Berlin, was a former teacher, and I have a question to the participants from Japan and maybe to Alexander. Excuse me. We have in Germany the discussion about the 2% rate from the GDP to spend for defense affairs and facilities, and it's a discussion. It came up when President Trump became president the first time, and now we have the discussion again. And my question is, how is the situation in Japan? How is the discussion in the public area, and is it possible to say something about the opinion of the inhabitants? Thank you.
All right. Admiral Takei, Japan's defense budget in relation to its.
Yeah, the Japanese government decided 2% is we learned from NATO. NATO, each country increased defense budget to 2% of GDP. Japanese government learned from that and decided to substantially increase defense budget to 2%. So, and the current situation, I think the 2% has a bipartisan support in the Diet members. And the question is the resource, where such budget comes from. By increase the consumption tax, was I increase some tax? That is another question. And however, the 2% is supported by the Diet members as well as Japanese people. Almost Japanese people support. The current situation in Japanese economy is getting worse, but in the future is ambiguous. But up to now, it is supported by Japanese people, 2%.
Thank you. The Japanese government is committed to increase its own defense budget to the level of 2% of its GDP by 2027, according to the National Defense Strategy, National Security Strategy. Alexandra?
Yeah, I'll add on the 2% goal. I think there was some public polls after Japan announced its national security strategy with that goal to increase defense budget. And I don't remember the numbers exactly, but it's a majority of Japanese support this goal, but it's not a huge majority. So it's above 50%, but I think even below 60 maybe, or around that number, if I recall correctly. I'd have to look it up, but in essence, yes, there's support, but it's not huge. And then the question comes up for alternative ways of spending that money. And the Kishida government, for example, wants to increase child allowances, etc. So there's a host of other possibilities of spending that money. And obviously, Japan's economy is not doing that well that you can just go out on a spending spree. So I think these questions of competition between where to spend your resources is going to become more difficult. But one thing that we have to consider, I think that Japan really feels like a frontline state by now. The challenge to the Senkaku dispute is so directly against Japan's territorial integrity that I think there's a much stronger will to move with things. And what shows that is if you look at the 2023 defense budget that Japan has, that was already increased, I think, by more than 20% over the previous year. So that's where you see that Japan is willing to go forward with an increase. Whether it's going to go to that 2% goal may be a different question, but I think that Japan's security environment is so harsh and difficult that there's maybe a stronger will compared to Germany to actually move things forward with that.
Final question.
And yes, how do you estimate the capabilities of the Japan economy to switch to a more military kind of way? In Germany we have some problems, as we learned on a daily basis, that it's not that easy to make more tanks and munition and ammunition and so on. And is there Japan a little bit more capable to do this?
I think it is a very good question. And last summer, there is an opinion poll for all Japanese people, how they think about Taiwan Strait crisis. 91% of the Japanese people, it's real in coming years. So Japanese government increase, strengthen the defense capability as planned. So the number one is to have the counter-strike capability, and the Japanese self-defense force can strike inside the continent, for example, China or the North Korea. This is the first time in the history Japan will have such a capability, maybe thousands of missiles in coming years, within a decade. And also the other one is active cyber defense. It is offensive nature of cyber defense capability. It depends on the diet decided the new law, legislation, to be able to self-defense force and the other organization to do active cyber defense. However, in the future, the self-defense force increase the command to 4,000 soldiers and sailors to have a cyber attack capability, and in the future it is possible. Anyway, Japanese government eagerly strengthen defense capability now. I think it's coming soon.
Great, thank you. Well, I think that there are many more comments and questions on your mind, but it is already 6 p.m., so it is time to close this public seminar. I'm not qualified to wrap up this very important but challenging session. But, anyway, I hope that all of us fully understood the diverse aspects of the theme of today's public symposium, and I hope that this event will help to promote the understanding of the East Asian security, particularly maritime security issues on the part of Europeans, and also I hope that it will help promote the security cooperation between East Asia and Europe. So with that, I'd like to conclude today's seminar, and thanking the Konrad Adenauer Stiftung, and also thanking all the five panelists. Thank you very much. Please join me in